Hello, I'm Gordon Lang, editor of CameraLabs.com. I'd like to give you a brief video tour around the Canon EF 24-105mm lens. Here it is, the 24-105mm. This lens is fully compatible with the complete range of Canon DSLRs, whether they've got cropped frame sensors or full frame sensors. But depending on which kind of body you've got it mounted on, it represents a completely different proposition. So we've got two separate reviews of this lens and two separate video tours to go with them. In this video tour, we're going to be looking at the 24-105mm on a cropped frame body, such as the EOS 40D or the EOS 400D Rebel XTI, which is what I've got it mounted on here. Now, when you have got this lens mounted on a cropped frame Canon body, it will deliver an equivalent coverage of 38-168mm. And we've got some coverage examples of that coming up in just a moment. But right now, let's take a look at some of the physical characteristics of this lens. You'll notice that it's got a red ring around the edge of the barrel. This denotes that it's one of Canon's L series lenses. That's L for luxury, and it gives it several benefits over the non-L counterparts. First of all, you get a lens hood with it. You don't get one of those with Canon's non-L lenses, unfortunately, and you also get a pouch to carry the lens around in. The build quality on this lens is also absolutely fantastic. If you've never used an L lens before, prepare yourself for a shock because it really is a big step up from the non-L models. It feels very, very solid and the mechanical performance is excellent. Have a look at the manual focusing ring here, which on most L lenses is at the outer edge of the barrel. Now when you turn it, there's absolutely no catching at all, and you also don't need to disengage the autofocus. This is full-time manual focus. It just feels very, very smooth. Likewise with the zoom ring here, and if I zoom it in, you can see the extent to which the barrel extends. Here it is zoomed in to the 105mm position, or the equivalent of 168 on one of these bodies. And as I zoom out, you'll see that there's absolutely no problem with creep here, where the lens can actually fall down under its own weight. The 24-105mm also features a USM focusing motor. As you can see here, it's very, very quick and also very quiet. The 24-105mm is also an IS model. That stands for image stabilization, and that means that there's a special element within the lens that actually adjusts to counteract the camera shake. And because it's an optical system that's built into the lens, you'll see the effect through the optical viewfinder. And when you zoomed in with this lens, that can be very reassuring to see that stabilized view. But that's enough of the physical characteristics for the moment. Let's take a look at what you could actually do with this lens when it's mounted on a crop frame body. We'll start by showing you the coverage of the 24-105mm when mounted on a crop frame body. Here it is fully zoomed out and working at an equivalent of 38mm. And as you can see, it's managing to capture this landscape view quite effectively. Now here it is zoomed in all the way to an equivalent of 168mm, and as you can see, it's allowing us to get pretty close to some distant details. Now that actually looks like quite a usable range in practice, but to really put it into perspective, let's see what you'd get with the standard 18-55mm kit lens. So once again, here's the 24-105mm zoomed out, giving an equivalent of 38mm. Now here's the kit lens, it's fully zoomed out to 18mm, and you can see it's capturing a much wider field of view. And that could be really important to you in situations where you need to capture particularly large landscapes, big buildings, interiors, or maybe even big group shots. This is the real downside of using the 24-105mm on a crop frame body. But what you miss out on wide angle, you gain in telephoto coverage. Here's the 18-55mm kit lens fully zoomed in to 55, and now here's the 24-105mm fully zoomed in to an equivalent of 168, and you can see it obviously gets much, much closer. So range is a very personal thing, and you have to work out whether the 38-168mm equivalent will work for your style of photography. This landscape shot was taken with the 24-105mm zoomed out at an equivalent of 38mm, and you can see the composition looks fine, but that's only because we were able to stand back far enough to squeeze it all in. In other situations you might not be so lucky. Take this test shot of a yacht, for example. Now normally in our gallery pictures at CameraLabs.com you'll see that we fit in the whole sail, but to do that you'll need an equivalent of say around 28mm. With an equivalent of 38mm, however, we couldn't squeeze it all in, and this was one situation where we literally couldn't step back any further without getting very, very wet. At the other end of the scale though, you've got decent medium telephoto coverage, equivalent to 168mm. That's ideal for portraits or for simply getting a bit closer to distant subjects. This portrait shot was taken with the lens fully zoomed in to an equivalent of 168mm and with the aperture wide open to f4. Now the nice thing about this lens is that you get that f4 aperture throughout the entire range, and as you can see it's produced a really nice out of focus background effect. The image stabilisation facilities are also very effective in practice, allowing you to handhold shots typically 3 times slower than normal. This photo was taken indoors, again with the lens zoomed out to an equivalent of 38mm, but the shutter speed was just 1/13 of a second. And the result is absolutely pin sharp. There's no problem with camera shake at all here. And with 3 stops of compensation, you could handhold a shot like this even slower still. It's a great facility to have in practice. There's certainly no doubting the physical characteristics of this lens. Both the mechanical and the build quality are a big step up from Canon's existing EFS range of lenses, although it can feel a little front heavy when mounted on the smaller and lighter bodies like the 400D or XTI. It certainly feels a lot more comfortable and better balanced when mounted on a more substantial body like the EOS 40D. But don't let that put you off buying this lens. If you have a 400D or XTI, we just recommend that you try it out in person in a shop first to see how the size and weight are balanced for you. It is however worth mentioning that even though it's an L lens that's mounted on a crop frame body, don't necessarily expect optical perfection. We did notice a couple of issues with this lens, particularly in terms of coloured fringing, and you can find out all about that by heading over to our full review at the Camera Labs website. Ultimately though, the choice of this lens really depends on whether you think you're going to be going full frame in the future and whether the range actually suits your style of photography. Starting at an equivalent range of 38mm when mounted on a crop frame body, it's really missing out on wide angle coverage. Now of course that might not bother you, it's a very personal thing, and of course you could also be accompanying this lens with a wider angle model, perhaps Canon's own EFS 10-22mm. They make a great combination, so that's something that you have to weigh up for yourself. And you should also weigh up the alternatives. For about 2 to 3 times less you could buy the 17-85mm. Or for about the same price you could buy the 17-55mm, which has a much brighter f2.8 focal ratio. So to compare the actual features and quality of these 3 lenses, head on over to the Camera Labs site. There we've got full results which compare them along with sample images taken with the 24-105mm and of course up-to-date pricing for all of those options. So to find out whether this is the ideal general purpose lens for you and your cropped frame DSLR, head on over to www.cameralabs.com.